Welcome to Washington Hospital Today, the program dedicated to sharing timely information about the community hospital that's been taking care of Washington Township Healthcare District residents since it opened in 1958. Washington Hospital Today is provided for the sole purpose of informing residents about healthcare topics and issues that have been covered during community forums, free health and wellness classes, or as part of educational sessions held during the district's open board meetings. This program is one more way that Washington Hospital helps empower you, the residents of the district, by providing information needed to make informed decisions about your health.
Hi, well, welcome to Diabetes Matters, for those of you who haven't been here before. And thank you to Sandy for inviting me to come talk on this topic. So we're going to talk about carbohydrate counting and food labels. So I hope I maybe clear up questions you may have on sugar substitutes, sugar alcohols, the term net carbs, dietary fiber. That's all going to be talked about tonight. So what we eat is one of those areas of diabetes self-management that we can control and change and improve. Hopefully it's a fun part of diabetes management. We like to eat, right? Exercise is not always so fun, but can also be very beneficial for diabetes control. And of course our medications is that area that, you know, if we're consistent in and done correctly, can also help with our diabetes control. When we talk about food, there are 3 energy nutrients in the diet that give us energy. We have protein. So proteins come from, primarily protein foods would be like chicken, fish, eggs. Fats also give us energy. So examples of fats would be oils, butter, margarine. Those foods are primarily fats and proteins. The third group is carbohydrate, and that is the energy nutrient that affects our blood sugars the most, and so we focus on that for the most part when we're diabetes meal planning. So just to give you some facts about carbohydrates, they do raise your blood glucose levels more than other nutrients, so more than protein and fat, but they are a necessary part of your diet. They're the preferred fuel for your brain and your central nervous system, so we can't exclude them. We just have to eat them in the right amount, and there may also be certain ones that are better for us. Very low carbohydrate diets are not recommended, so the Institute of Medicine recommends at least 130 grams of carbohydrate a day. And we're going to talk about carb choices in a little bit, but that's equal to about 10 carb choices per day. Are all carbohydrates created equal? I would say no. There are definitely some that are more nutritious and better choices. So I'm going to also give you some recommendations in that area. So steps to carb counting. If this is a new area for you or a new diagnosis for you, the first thing you have to learn is what foods contain carbohydrate. So you know which foods you have to monitor or portion or limit. And then learn portions for what we call carb choices. So that is one method of monitoring your meal plan when you have diabetes, is carb counting, or eating a certain number of carb choices per meal. So once you have some information on what foods have carbohydrate in them, and you learn portions for carb choices, then you have to go about starting to practice a sensible meal plan that includes controlled and consistent amounts of carbohydrate day to day. So most people have a certain amount of medication they take for their diabetes day to day, and so ideally we're matching the amount of carbohydrate that you're eating to that medication. And if you eat a lot of carbohydrate on one day and on another day you try to skip all the carbohydrate in your meals, what do you think will happen to your blood sugars? They'll be probably too high on one day and too low on the day where you're trying to eliminate the carbohydrate. So it's going to give you more steady and even blood sugars if you try to do about the same amount from day to day. Doesn't mean you have to eat the same foods day to day, but the same amount of carbohydrate. And then once you're following a meal plan, you want to be self-monitoring your blood sugars to give you feedback on if that meal plan is working for you. If you're still running too high, you might have to do some further adjustment in your meal plan. So the blood sugar goals that we use in our program is 70 to 120 before meals, and 2 hours after starting a meal, you should be below 160. So that's blood sugar goals that you can, if you do start to self-monitor, or if you've been checking, you should be aiming for those ranges. Again, your doctor might have different blood sugar goals for you. These are the numbers we use in our program. So definitely, if you have different numbers or different goals, follow those numbers. Okay, so let's go with the first step in carb counting is identifying foods that have carbohydrate. So carbohydrate is found in foods of the plant kingdom. So vegetables, we're not usually worried about the carbohydrate that's in non-starchy vegetables like green leafy vegetables, lettuce, carrots, tomatoes, zucchini. Most people don't eat too much vegetable. They fill you up. There's a lot of fiber in vegetables. So you're not going to have a high blood sugar from eating too much vegetable. So they do have a little carbohydrate in them, but we're not concerned about the carbohydrate in vegetables. We do want to watch the carbohydrate that you're going to get from starches, like breads, grains, cereals, rice, pasta, starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, peas, beans, and lentils all have more of a significant amount of carbohydrate in them. Carbohydrate is also found in fiber, but if it's a non-digestible type of fiber that's in a grain or in a vegetable, again, that probably will not affect your blood sugar. It will maybe help fill you up with a meal, but not affect the blood sugar after the meal. Then we also have sugars in the diet that are a source of carbohydrate. And we break it into natural sugars, so fruits and milk and yogurt, fruit juice are all sources of natural sugars. And then we have added sugars. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how to identify foods that have added sugars, because we'd like to try to limit those. So sweetened drinks, candy, cookies, pastries, table sugar, syrup, jam, those are examples of added sugars in the diet. But they're all carbohydrate. When we're carb counting, we break up foods into these 15-gram increments. It makes it a little bit easier to kind of count and keep track. So a carbohydrate choice is equal to 15 grams carbohydrate. How many of you have taken a class and done a little bit of practicing with carb counting? Some of you have? Okay. So this might be maybe a little bit new for some of you. But if you have 1 cup of milk or 1 cup of plain yogurt, that has about 15 grams carbohydrate in it. Or if you have 1/3 of a cup of cooked rice or 1/3 of a cup of cooked pasta, that also has about 15 grams carbohydrate. So for every 1/3 of a cup of rice, you have 15 grams. So what if you eat a whole cup of rice? How much carbohydrate is? 45 grams, okay. Or you could say 3 carb choices. So that's kind of how you would add up the carbohydrate. Most standard like sliced bread is about 15 grams carbohydrate. Some might be 18 or 14, but so we round it to 15 just for carb counting. If you eat half of an English muffin, that's 15 grams or one carb choice. So if you eat the whole English muffin, how much is that? Okay, 2 carb choices or 30 grams carbohydrate. One little corn tortilla is 15 grams. Now, I don't have flour tortilla on here because they vary. The real little ones that are like the fajita size might be close to a carb choice. They might be 15. But then you have the big burrito size, which could be 60 grams carb. They vary, so you need to look on the label. If you have cooked beans or half a cup of cooked cereal like oatmeal, that has about 15 grams carbohydrate in it as well. Fruit also varies. So there are very detailed carbohydrate counting books you can get. But in general, one medium fruit, like a small apple or a small orange, is about 15 grams carbohydrate. Or if you have a half cup of juice, again, that's about 15 grams. So these are all one carb choice. So strategies for carb counting include counting, controlling your portions, and consistency. Those are all key to carb counting. And there's information out there. You can go to, I think, even the ADA website, American Diabetes Association website for information. They have a diabetic, what they call exchange list, which is a real detailed booklet, which you can order if you want real detailed information on each food group, on fruits and starches and portions. You can buy carbohydrate counting books from bookstore or online. The nutrition facts label is a good source if it's a packaged food that you're looking at. For some things like fruits or a vegetable, you might have to look for information somewhere else. In our diabetes self-management classes, we teach carb counting, and there are even smartphone applications that you can put in what you ate, and it will calculate the calories and calculate the carbs and everything for you. So there are a lot of different ways. How many of you, did anyone here do that with a smartphone? Track their calories or carbs or, no? Okay. There are people who do it. So I do get this question a lot. How much carbohydrate should I eat at meals? I have to say there's no one size fits all for people with diabetes. There's a lot of factors. Gender, age, your activity level, your weight goals. So definitely you want to eat at the low end of the range for carbohydrates if you're trying to lose weight. Other health issues, if you have high blood pressure or if you have kidney failure, there's a lot of factors that kind of determine how much carbohydrate you need. And also if you're an active person and you exercise, generally you can eat a little bit more than someone who's sedentary. So what I say, if you just want a number, kind of a starting point, we usually suggest for women start at about 30 to 45 grams per meal, which is equal to 2 to 3 carb choices per meal. And for men, start around 45 to 60 grams per meal, so you get a little bit more. So that's 3 to 4 carb choices per meal. And then go from there. You might go up or down depending on how you feel, if you feel it's enough food, your blood sugars are controlled. So you still have to monitor your blood sugars and see how that range works for you. Okay, so now let's talk about how to read the information on the nutrition facts label. How many of you like grocery shopping? Looking at those labels, trying to figure out if it's a good choice or not. Sometimes I just walk away and I don't buy anything because it drives me crazy. So the place to start when you're reading food labels is always at the top, at the serving size, because all the information on the label is going to be based on the serving size. So I don't know why the FDA does this, but their sample food label is macaroni and cheese, and it's really not a very healthy example, but this is the one that they give on their website. But anyway, the serving size for this macaroni and cheese is 1 cup. So you have to ask yourself first, am I going to eat 1 cup, or am I going to eat 2 cups, or am I going to eat half a cup? So if you're going to eat 2 cups, you want to double all that information. Double the calories, double the sodium, double the fat, everything. If you're going to eat, say, half a cup, then you can cut those numbers in half. So let's say we're going to eat 1 cup. So the calories are 250. And if you're just wondering, you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at the label when you're at the store, but you want to know, is this also a heart-healthy choice? Look over at calories from fat. So just eyeballing this, almost half the calories are from fat, which tells you this is a high-fat choice. So right off the bat, if you really love macaroni and cheese and you want to fit it in, you can still pick it, but watch your fat the rest of the day and maybe for a couple days. But it's more of a high-fat choice. The next thing to look at is this yellow section. These are the nutrients Americans tend to get too much of. Too much fat, too much saturated fat, too much cholesterol, too much sodium. So you want to look for products that have lower numbers in this category, lower sodium. So especially if you're comparing, say, 2 soups or 2 crackers, look for the ones that are lower in saturated fat, lower in sodium, lower in cholesterol. And that will also still taste good, though, so because that's important too. And these blue areas, dietary fiber and these nutrients, these are nutrients Americans tend to not get enough of. So you want to look for higher numbers in this area. Look for foods that have dietary fiber, give you some vitamin A, give you some vitamin C, or a good source of calcium, which the macaroni and cheese is because it has milk in it and cheese in it, or give you some iron. So higher numbers in that area is good. Total carbohydrate, that's the area we look at for carb counting. And the number you want to use, they will give you dietary fiber sometimes, sugars, sugar alcohols, but for carb counting, you want to look at total carbohydrate. So in this cup of macaroni and cheese, it's 31 grams. So how many carb choices is that equal to? To 2, right. So if you're gonna have this cup of macaroni and cheese, you've got 2 carb choices at that meal. And if you're a woman, you could still have 1 or 2 more carb choices in addition to that macaroni and cheese, if you're gonna just have 1 cup. Now for those of you who you're not really sure how much a cup is, I suggest at home, you cook your rice, cook your macaroni and cheese, cook those starchy foods, and actually measure them onto your plate at least a couple times. So you can eyeball it and see if you're maybe overestimating how much carbohydrate you're eating. So that's a good idea. Then when you're out at restaurants, you also will have a good idea. Oh, that looks like 2 cups of rice. If you're normally at home eating a lot less. So it will help you with your portion control. So unfortunately, this macaroni and cheese doesn't have any dietary fiber. And we will talk a little bit more about whole grains and fiber in a minute here. Percent daily value, this column on the right, it pertains to people who need about 2,000 calories a day. So at the bottom of the nutrition facts label, and it won't always be there, they'll have this kind of extended label if there's room on the product. But what it's saying, that percent daily value is saying, if you need about 2,000 calories a day, which is probably more than a lot of people in this room need, especially the women here, we probably need closer to 1,600 or 1,800 calories. So we would actually need less than those percent daily values. But it just says if, for fat, for example, that 12 grams of fat provides about 18% of this person's total fat for the day they should have if they were eating about 2,000 calories a day. So it's just to give you an idea for the rest of your choices for the day. You should be careful because you're eating a pretty high fat food there. So if all your other choices the rest of the day are high like that, you probably will eat more fat than you should. So just general rule of thumb with the percent daily values, if it's less than 5% of the daily value for fat or cholesterol or saturated fat or sodium, it's a good heart healthy choice. And if it's more than 20% of the daily value for fat and cholesterol and saturated fat and sodium, it's considered too high, relatively high in those nutrients. And so, not that you can't pick it, but again, just so you kind of are aware of how you might be able to fit it into your meal plan and still be within, kind of a healthy range maybe. So it might affect the other choices you make for the rest of the day. So what I have here is another example. This is just a bread label I got online. It's a bread that's out there in the market. Because in addition to the nutrition facts label, we also have an ingredient list. And the way they list the ingredients, it's in descending order from the ingredient that is predominantly in the product down to the ingredient that is the least amount. So they do it by weight. So in this bread, whole wheat flour is the first ingredient. It's primarily whole wheat flour. The second ingredient is water, and then sugar. So this does have added sugar. I think most breads, not all breads, but most breads do have added sugar or honey or some kind of sweetener. And this would be where you look for if you're trying to identify, you're looking for whole grains, or you're looking for added sugars, or you're looking for what type of oil or fat they use. What I like about this bread is that it uses a liquid soybean oil, and there's no hydrogenated fats. So you do want to try to choose products that give you healthy fats, less added sugar ideally, and whole grains. So when you're choosing breads or crackers, look for ideally whole wheat or other whole grains. Now let's look just to practice on another label here. So this bread, one slice, has about 90 calories. And just eyeballing these percent daily values, they're pretty low. Most breads, if it's just like a regular sliced sandwich bread, is usually low in fat, and it will have a little bit of sodium. Most breads, unless you're buying like a low sodium bread, it will have sodium added for some flavor. I don't know if any of you have ever tried low sodium bread. It's pretty not very good. So watch your sodium maybe in other areas, probably not cutting it out of the bread. Someone tell me what's the total carbohydrate in this slice of bread? 18. So what does that equal to as far as carb choices? About 1, right? So once in a while you might find bread that's exactly 15, but it's going to sometimes be around that. So when we're carb counting, if we have one slice of bread, that would be 1 carb choice or 15 grams carbohydrate. If we end up having 2 slices, then you're going to count it as 2 carb choices or 30 grams carbohydrate. So some people like to think in terms of grams of carbohydrate. Other people like to think in terms of carb choices. And other people can just, maybe just think in terms of cups and portions that are more visual. So whatever works for you is fine. There's no one way that you have to do it. I do want to emphasize trying to encourage looking for whole grains when you're picking bread products and grain products. Whole grains have not been stripped of the bran and the germ part of the grain. And there's a lot of evidence that eating whole grains in a significant amount can reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. The whole grain has B vitamins, phytochemicals, fiber that cannot be replaced and put back if the grain is refined. So once bread's been processed, they do add back some B vitamins and things that are stripped from it, but there's phytochemicals and other nutrients that can't be replaced that they believe are in that whole grain. So to identify whole grains on the label, look for 100% whole wheat or whole grain rye. It might say whole oats, whole barley, and not that you have to avoid products that maybe are a mix. Sometimes you'll see something that's whole grain plus maybe some refined wheat or some other flour in there, and that's okay too. But just try to make choices that give you some whole grain. Half your daily grain servings a day should be whole grain. That's what we recommend. Now, one of the handouts I gave you, which is probably a little easier to read than this slide, what I did was, and I was very interested in comparing dietary fiber and carbohydrate amount and protein amount in different grains. There are many grains out there, and some of these that are listed as ancient grains like teff and kamut have been kind of brought back in popularity because they're a little bit higher in protein and high in fiber. So I rank these from top to bottom. The ones at the top have more dietary fiber and protein, down to the ones at the bottom, like white rice happens to be at the bottom. It doesn't give you any dietary fiber and really not a significant, it gives you some protein, but it is also pretty high in carbohydrate. So these are all equal as far as serving size, about 1 cup cooked. And so some of the better choices near the top are bulgur, spelt, teff, kamut. These are maybe a little bit harder to find, but you will see these in grocery stores. Barley, quinoa, buckwheat, oat bran, oatmeal. These are all good sources of whole grain and good sources of fiber. Now I wanted to just point out a comparison between brown rice and white rice. So near the middle there we have brown rice. So a whole cup cooked gives you 45 grams carbohydrate, which is how many carb choices? 3, okay. And dietary fiber, 3.5 grams, which is good, and 5 grams of protein. Now if we compare that to wild rice, which is actually not entirely a rice, it's more of another type of grain, but that's a little bit lower in carbohydrate per cup, which is good. Dietary fiber about the same, a little bit higher in protein. So, you know, some of these that give you a little bit more protein may also give you a little bit more satiety or help fill you up. But when we compare those to long grain and short grain white rice, which have been polished of their bran and fiber, the carbohydrate, especially in short grain white rice, it's a very starchy rice, and the carbohydrate's pretty high, 53 grams per cup, and no dietary fiber, and the protein, 4.4 grams. But you might want to try different grains in your meal planning, check your blood sugars and see if you see any difference or improvement in your blood sugars. It's still about watching portions, so whether it's brown rice or white rice or quinoa, still watch the portion, but you might have a little bit better blood sugar response with some of these different grains. So they're probably worth trying. And some, if you like chewy or nutty or different kinds of tasty grains, you might enjoy a change. So now I wanted to talk about some of the sugar claims you'll see on labels. The FDA regulates these claims. For a product to say it's sugar-free, it has to contain less than 5.5 grams of sugar per serving. For it to have the claim reduced sugar, it has to have at least 25% less sugar than the regular version of that product. And if it says no added sugars or without added sugars, it means no sugar-containing ingredient has been added during processing. But that doesn't refer to sugar alcohols, which we're going to talk about. So they're kind of excluded from that. First, I want to talk about trends in added sugar consumption, though, because the trend has been increasing every time they do surveys with Americans. The amount of sugar we eat is going up and up and up. And the U.S. annual sugar intake is up to about 156 pounds per capita, or 22 teaspoons per day per person. And that can be in sugars we're knowingly adding, or sugars that are in foods that we're eating, not realizing that it has added sugars in it. Of that sugar intake, sugar-sweetened beverages make up about 33% of those added sugars, like colas, Gatorades, those types of drinks. And trends in added sugar intake seem to parallel trends in obesity and diabetes in the United States. So there's definitely concern and call for trying to decrease our added sugars. And some of the studies looking at added sugars and health risks link added sugar consumption to increased blood pressure, increase in triglyceride levels, increased fasting glucose, decreased insulin sensitivity, increased visceral adiposity, meaning abdominal fat, or where we're storing our fat, increased inflammation, and oxidative stress. You can see all of these are risk factors for heart disease. So for that reason, the American Heart Association put out some recommendations for decreasing, recommending levels of sugar, added sugar intake for Americans. Now, if you want to identify added sugars on the label to try to limit them, or again, if you're comparing products, maybe pick one that has less added sugar in it, you want to look under the ingredient label for the term sugar or sucrose, fructose, lactose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, honey, molasses, and malt sugar. These are all terms for added sugar. Now, food will sometimes have natural sugar in it, like, for example, yogurt. If you buy just a plain yogurt, it doesn't have any added sugar, but on the label, under total carbohydrate, it will list some sugars, and that's from the natural lactose sugar that's in the yogurt. Now, if you buy a fruited yogurt or something that has fruit on the bottom, you'll see that the total sugar is going to be much higher, because it's going to have the natural sugar in there plus the added sugars from the syrup or the fruit. So the American Heart Association recommends trying to limit calories from added sugars. And for adult women, they recommend no more than 5 teaspoons per day, which equals about 80 calories from added sugars. And for the average adult man, about 9 teaspoons per day, or 144 calories. So to give you a frame of reference, one cola has about 8 teaspoons of added sugar, or 130 calories. So one way you can try to reduce added sugars is buying products that are reduced in sugar because they're sweetened with sugar alcohols or non-nutritive sweeteners. So sugar alcohols are one type of reduced calorie sweetener. You can find them in ice cream, cookies, sugar-free chewing gum, candy. I did bring a product in as an example. On average, sugar alcohols provide about half the calories and carbohydrate of regular sugar. So they will reduce the calories and the carbohydrate in a food when they're added. And even though they're called sugar alcohols, they don't actually contain any alcohol, so you don't have to worry. That just refers to the chemical structure. So some of the popular sugar alcohols are listed here: erythritol, maltitol, xylitol. I think I see quite often in sugar-free gums. And sometimes there may be more than one. So when you look on a label, you might see more than one listed. So for example, I brought in these sugar-free vines, and they are made with maltitol syrup. So that's the sugar alcohol in these. But they also have wheat flour. So when I look at the total carbohydrate, there's 25, but it does list out the carbohydrate from the sugar alcohols. So I'm going to kind of explain how to carb count when you have a sugar alcohol on a product. So pros and cons of sugar alcohols. Foods made with sugar alcohols may have less calories. You do have to look at the label. So they can maybe assist with weight management or weight loss, and with your blood sugar control. They can be used to sweeten foods without adding many calories at all. And they can be used to replace sugar in recipes. The cons, they're not always, the product isn't always necessarily a better choice. So you want to look at the label, look at the calories, look at the fat, look at the total carbohydrate. Always look at the fat content, because sometimes on sugar-free products, they increase the fats to make the product taste better because they've taken out the sugar. So it may not necessarily be a better choice. And in large amounts, sugar alcohols can have a laxative effect, can cause diarrhea, gas, bloating, and so you want to not eat too much of these products if you haven't had them before, just to try them out. But do compare the lower sugar version of one product with maybe the regular version to see if it really is saving you that much in carbohydrate. Compare price. Try to be a savvy shopper, because the regular version may be okay if you just maybe cut back the portion and watch how much you eat of it. So when you're carb counting with sugar alcohols, the effect of the sugar alcohol can vary depending on the individual and the sugar alcohol that's in the product. So it's a little difficult to know how that sugar alcohol will affect your blood glucose every time. Because there's less of an effect from sugar alcohols than either sugar or starch, you can use the following tips to estimate how much carbohydrate from a serving to count in your meal plan for foods. If it contains more than 5 grams of sugar alcohol per serving. So if a product has more than 5 grams sugar alcohol, subtract half of the sugar alcohol from the amount of the total carbohydrate, and I'm going to give you an example on the next slide, and then count the remaining grams of carbohydrate in your meal plan. So for example, let's say you want to eat this candy bar that it's sweetened with sugar alcohols. And the total carbohydrate is 15 grams, and it has 6 grams of sugar alcohol in it. So it tells you that on the label. You would subtract half of the sugar alcohol, so you'd subtract off 3 from your total of 15. And so you would count that bar as 12 grams of carbohydrate. Now, for most people, you probably don't even need to do that. For people who have maybe an insulin pump, or you're doing very intensive insulin and carb counting, then you may want to be more precise and subtract off that sugar alcohol. But for 3 grams of carbohydrate, it may not make much of a difference for most people. Now, artificial sweeteners are a little different than sugar alcohols, because sugar alcohols have some calories. Artificial sweeteners do not have any. There is a nice handout in the back about them. They're also called low-calorie sweeteners, non-nutritive sweeteners, sugar substitutes, They're all the same thing. A lot of products that have sugar substitutes in them or artificial sweeteners in them may still have calories. So you have to look at the label to determine that. Their sweetening power is 100 times more than regular sugar. So they only have to use a very small amount to sweeten. And with the exception of aspartame, they pass through the body undigested and unmetabolized. So they don't raise your blood sugar, they don't add any calories to the diet, and they that basically pass through unchanged. They also don't cause dental caries, which is a good thing. So the ones listed next are all FDA approved. So we currently have 5 artificial sweeteners on the market. We have acesulfame potassium, aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, and neotame. And they're used by companies. Sometimes you'll see more than one used in a product. They're used in diet sodas, they're used in candy, ice cream, cookies, variety of products. They're also used as tabletop sweeteners. And you can also buy them in a form where you can use for baking, which, you know, I've done that with sucralose, and it works pretty well for baking. So if you look on the ingredient label, it's going to be listed as the sweetener, as acesulfame potassium or aspartame. So if you're looking at a product and you're trying to figure out what is it sweetened with, because it says it's sugar-free, it could be a sugar alcohol or it could be one of these artificial sweeteners. So you're going to have to look for neotame or sucralose. If you're buying the tabletop sweetener, those are the brand names that you'll see in the store. You'll see Splenda or Sweet and Low. Stevia is a whole other category, which I'm going to talk about next. So stevia is it's a South American shrub, and the leaves are used as a sweetener. It's also called Rhabdosiide A or Rebiana, and it's now generally recognized as safe by the FDA as a food additive and tabletop sweetener. It's several hundred times sweeter than sugar, and it's similar to the other artificial sweeteners. It does not raise your blood sugar, and so it can be used in the same way as you would those other artificial sweeteners. Although stevia is natural, it comes from a plant. It's not a man-made sweetener. But you can buy that at the store. The only point I wanted to make with this slide, because we're running a little bit to the end here, is if you use a lot of those packets of the tabletop sweeteners, the calories can add up. I mean, you'd have to use quite a bit, but sometimes I do come across people who like to use a lot of them. So even though they are, sugar-free, because they want to add some texture to make these artificial sweeteners look more like sugar, they add basically like a bulking agent. So those do add a little bit of carbohydrate and calories. So in very large amounts, if you're using a lot of those packets of Splenda or equal, the calories can add up a little bit. But still, in comparison, if you look at the bottom there, 1 packet of Splenda is 4 calories, still less than a gram of carbohydrate, compared to a packet of sugar. So these are all teaspoon servings. A packet of sugar has 11 calories and 3 grams carbohydrate. So even there, 1 packet of sugar is not a lot. But if you're using, if you like your coffees or teas really sweet and you're using a lot of sugar, then that carbohydrate will add up then. Now, how do you use net carbs? How many of you have seen the term net carbs on a product and wondered? Okay, so what they're referring to is the sugar alcohols or the dietary fiber that's in that. The FDA does not have a legal definition of what net carbs are. And so products can use it, and it's not like it's regulated, like you have to use it a certain way if you use it on a product. So it can be interpreted a little bit differently product to product. The American Diabetes Association doesn't recommend using net carbs for meal planning. You should use the nutrition facts label, look at the total carbohydrate, and because the total carbohydrate will list all the different types of starches, your sugars, your dietary fiber, your sugar alcohols, the starches, etc. So you want to use the total carbohydrate for meal planning. But if you are on intensive insulin therapy or advanced carbohydrate counting, you can use the following rules to adjust your carbs. So again, and we already went over this, but with sugar alcohols, if you have more than 5 grams of sugar alcohols per serving, you could subtract half of that sugar alcohol from the total grams. And then that would be your total for that serving. Same thing with dietary fiber. If it's a pretty high fiber food, if it has more than 5 grams of fiber, dietary fiber per serving, you could subtract off half of that from your total, and then count that as your total carbohydrate. So that's one way to do it. But for someone who's not on insulin therapy or advanced carbohydrate counting, you don't necessarily have to do that. Just you can go with total carbohydrate. But don't be fooled by net carbs thinking that you're actually consuming less carbohydrate. It may have more of an effect on your blood sugar than the label is trying to claim that it will. So the take-home message, when you're carb counting on food labels, the total carbohydrate is the number to use. For products with a significant amount of fiber or sugar alcohols, you may be able to subtract a portion from your total carbohydrate. Try to limit or avoid products that are high in added sugars. Look for whole grains and nutritious carbohydrate sources. And always compare products. The regular version may sometimes be the best choice instead of a sugar-free version, and just watch your portions and carb count. So that's my presentation, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
What do they mean when they talk about double fiber bread? Is that lower in carbs than, regular bread?
Well, I've noticed the double fiber breads have additional fiber added. So the bread sample I had on the screen, I think it had 4 grams of dietary fiber, which is pretty good. But some of those double fiber breads might have like 8 or 9. Yeah, which is probably, you could, in the case like that, you could probably subtract half of that off from your total. You're welcome. And sometimes they add good, like soluble fiber, like oat bran or something that might help your cholesterol level too.
Hi, I have 2 questions. One is, if we toast the bread, does it decrease the amount of carbs in it by any chance?
I think you're going to lose moisture that's in the bread. I don't know if you lose carbohydrate unless you lose some crumbs or something in the toaster. But
Okay.
probably won't change it very much.
Okay, all right. And the second question is, for instance, if the number of carbs listed are 15, let's say, and the fiber is 5, is it okay to subtract the fiber from the carbs to get a total number of carbs or something of that sort?
Well, the general rule that I gave tonight was if it's more than 5, you could subtract off half of it. So if you say it had 6 grams, you could subtract off 3 of the grams from the total.
I think we get the message that drinking, soda pop, sugary water basically is no good. But what about fruit juices like cran grape, cranberry juice, cran strawberry? Are those so-called fruit juices, are they as bad in terms of carbohydrate content as sodas?
Well, if you compare juice and a soda, the juice does have some nutritional value. It has vitamins in it. If it has pulp, it might give you some fiber. So it has more nutritional value than a soda. But I think what these studies that looked at added sugars also noted was that when people drink their calories, they tend to drink more because it doesn't satisfy you like the solid fruit would. So as long as you're careful and did not drink a lot of juice, I'd say that it's okay to include some juice. But I usually encourage people to eat whole fruit because it's more filling, and you could overeat fruit as well, but it's easy to drink calories. And it doesn't it doesn't turn off your hunger signal when you drink calories like food will when you eat solid food.
I want to know something more about stevia. Could you comment more on stevia?
Well, it was only a few years ago it was put in the category of generally recognized as safe by the FDA. So there are several brands now in the supermarket. So if you're looking for a sweetener that is considered natural versus one of the artificial sweeteners, there are two, I want to say, well actually there's more, like probably 3 or 4 different brands that are of stevia that you could choose from on the market. Is it a good thing? I think if you like the taste of it and you want to use it as a sweetener as opposed to sugar or one of the artificial sweeteners.
Very good.
Sure.
Can you comment on protein shakes? Protein shakes?
Oh, protein shakes? Yeah. Something you make from scratch or something you buy?
Something we buy.
I guess you still need to carb count. Sometimes the protein shakes still have sugar. What's the purpose behind the protein shake?
To have the more proteins in the food. We are vegetarians, so we don't eat chicken or meat, so we want to substitute by eating more protein.
By eating more protein.
So it is recommended to have protein shakes?
There's so many on the market. I don't want to just say yes generally, but if you could find one that's not high in fat, not too high in sugars or carbohydrate, if you can get protein from a lot of foods even on a vegetarian diet, I don't know if you necessarily need a protein shake.
For example?
Well, beans, lentils, milk. Do you eat dairy products? Mm-hmm. So yogurt. Those are all good sources of protein.
Maybe tofu?
Tofu? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. You don't necessarily, I think, need to get it from a shake if you eat all those other foods. And we don't need as much, we don't need a lot of protein in the diet. If you're healthy and walking around, you probably can get enough protein from the foods we talked about from beans and vegetables to a lesser degree have protein, and your grains and starches have protein. Or you can choose some of those grains that we talked about that are a little bit higher in protein to include. You could do that as well.
Yes, I have a question on whole grains, especially with people with high uric acid, like they have gout, and somebody told me don't have the whole grain because it makes it worse. Is it true or not?
I think we do recommend usually limiting certain grains like oatmeal, bran.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, there will always be exceptions to some of the recommendations. that we make, you know, based on your own personal health
Mainly
health history.
oatmeal and bran.
Yeah, mainly. Yeah, and then there's certain fish, seafoods, certain seafoods that are a little bit higher in purine that we recommend you limit also.
Okay, I think that concludes our program tonight. Thank you very much, Lorie.
You're welcome.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having me.